So where are we now? Well, here's the outline of what we've done up to now. We've said, all right, here's how we test hypotheses about the mean. So there are the first 4 steps, and then we say, here's the 5th step, 6 and 7, whichever way we do it, whether we do it by calculating the appropriate p-value or whether we do it by using our cutoffs for the appropriate alpha. What haven't we mentioned? In all of this, what haven't we mentioned? We haven't mentioned what happens to our power, or the type 2 error. So we've set the alpha at 0.05, but we haven't said anything about beta. So what about the probability of not rejecting H0 when we should be rejecting it? And we said that's beta. Or if we like to be positive in life, we can talk about 1 minus beta, and that's the power. So the relationship is power is 1 minus beta, or beta is 1 minus power, doesn't matter. So you got your alpha and your beta. Does this happen? And one very dramatic example of when this happens is in clinical trials, for example, when the FDA decides whether certain drugs should be allowed out onto the market. And if you look at the side effects of some of these drugs, maybe what's happened is we've not rejected the null hypothesis that they don't have any side effects, or that they have side effects that are acceptable, and when we should maybe. And here are some examples of some drugs that had to be called back. The first one, Omniflox, had to be brought back. This one was recalled less than 6 months after it had been out in the market. And there were all sorts of severe reactions associated with it. It was a broad spectrum antibiotic, including 3 deaths. Versed, it was out for about 18 months. It had 46 deaths associated with it, and so on, Phenaterol, Oraflex. So the question is, can we avoid this? It seems like we can't. It seems like even if, for example, if we're talking about a negative effect that can take 6 years to manifest itself, if you do the clinical trial lasting 5 years, you're not going to see it. This is sort of arguing for post-marketing monitoring to see what goes on. And it's still going on. These ones are more historical, but here's a list put together by Rhonda Schaffner of the Associated Press. And so there's 2010, 2009, 2007, and so on, going back 2001 and 2000, all the way back to 1997. So it's in the last 14 years or so. We see that this is a recurring theme. But let me tell you about something else that can happen, and that is negatively associated with the drug. And let me tell you the Bendectin story. Bendectin was a drug that was introduced in 1956 to combat morning sickness. So for pregnant women suffering from morning sickness, they had this drug, Bendectin. In the UK it has a different name, and in Canada it has a different name, and it's available all across the world except in the US. Why? Well, because in 1979 the National Enquirer had an article about Bendectin, and they had phrases like hideous birth defects are associated with Bendectin. They had statements by experts, quote experts, that compared Bendectin to thalidomide. And back in those days, the word thalidomide was, it still is, a very scary thought. But back in those days, it raised all sorts of horrible pictures. For those of you who don't know what the National Enquirer is, I don't know how to explain it. It's sort of when you're in the supermarket and you're waiting to check out stuff in the supermarket, and you see those I don't want to use the word rag, but those kinds of newspapers that you really shouldn't be spending any money buying, but you read while you're waiting in line at the supermarket, and you know, good for a laugh. But what happened to this here, because of that story, by 1983, after millions of dollars in litigation costs for alleged birth defects, Bendectin was removed from the market. Now, it's sad because at that time that was the only drug that had been approved by the FDA for to handle morning sickness. There were 30 large epidemiological studies done all over the world by very, very reputable organizations such as the WHO, the World Health Organization, the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, the March of Dimes. They all came to the same conclusion, namely that Bendectin is safe. So you had on this one side the National Enquirer claiming something, and then you had the preponderance of evidence in the scientific community saying that's nonsense. In fact, not one court case was lost. And here's an interesting study done, which is what we call an ecological study. So the argument is, look, if you've got a period when Bendectin is on the market and it's supposed to be doing some harm, then when you take it off the market, the frequency of that harm should decrease. But here is a graph. So what we've got at the bottom, let's look at the bottom one. So from the top here is the Bendectin sales. So we see this huge amount of Bendectin sales up until the early 80s, and then a precipitous drop down to zero. And so it was taken off the market, as I said. So there is the Bendectin sales. Now, remember, what was it supposed to be causing? It was supposed to be causing birth defects. Here are the birth defects. The little rectangles are birth defects, and about as straight a line as you can imagine for the birth defects. Taking it off the market doesn't seem to have had any impact on birth defects. What's the other line? The other line is the standardized by the number of births of the side effects of morning sickness. And so what we have up until early 1980, and then what we see is it climbs up, climbs up, climbs up, climbs up, and so on. Clearly, it is an ecological study, so all sorts of other things are going on here, but clearly it looks like from this that taking Bendectin off the market did not decrease the birth defects, and it did increase the hospitalizations. Now, the question is, why did the National Enquirer do this in the first place? Why did they publish the article? Well, it turns out that they were fed by Melvin Belli, a lawyer who had an interest in these mass tort cases and was suing the manufacturers of Bendectin and stood to make a lot of money had they been found culpable. Now, if you're interested in this stuff, a good place to start is the FDA, and they tell you about the recalls, and they do it for medications, for devices, etc. And I would say also don't miss the bottom one, because there they explain to you how to get the information from the FDA. It's a little bit difficult sometimes to find what you're really looking for in these large government agencies, but it's all there. So go ahead and take a look-see if you want to pursue this.